The stars glittered above, casting their silent light upon the endless void, as humanity's most advanced spacecraft, the Aegis, drifted into orbit around a forsaken planet catalogued only as D4517. From the helm of the bridge, Captain Elena Marlowe watched as the blue-gray surface rotated below them. Her face betrayed nothing, but her crew could feel the tension in the air. This planet had been marked on ancient star maps left behind by civilizations long extinct, each map accompanied by the same ominous warning translated in dozens of languages: they guard something worse. Elena's mission was simple in theory: discover the truth of D4517. Yet the implications were anything but simple. Humanity had clawed its way out of solar obscurity into galactic relevance through determination, resilience, and a knack for thriving where others faltered. But this mission was different. They weren't venturing into uncharted territories or facing down hostile alien forces. They were chasing ghosts, the shadows of civilizations that had risen and fallen millennia before the first human gazed at the stars. Civilizations whose ruins suggested technological prowess so advanced it made human ingenuity look like child's play. Yet here humanity stood, daring to poke at mysteries others had long since abandoned. Elena turned to her second-in-command, Commander Jackson Hayes, who was absently running diagnostics on his console for the 50th time that day. "Any updates from the surface scans?" she asked, her tone clipped. Jackson straightened, his perpetually messy hair catching the light from his display screen. "Nothing definitive yet, Captain. Atmospheric composition checks out, gravity's close to standard, and the planet's surface temperature is within tolerable limits. But there's a massive structure down there, right in the middle of what looks like a city. The energy readings coming from it," he hesitated, and for Jackson, who was rarely rattled, that said more than he probably intended. "Go on," Elena prompted, her green eyes locking on his. He exhaled sharply. "They're wrong. It's like nothing we've seen before. Pulsing, fluctuating, almost alive. And if our sensors are even remotely accurate, it's ancient. I mean, pre-humanity ancient." The bridge fell silent. The crew had all been briefed before departing Earth's orbit. They knew the stories, the warnings, and the rumors whispered by alien traders about D4517. Even those who prided themselves on skepticism couldn't entirely shake the unease. Breaking the tension, Ensign Ravi Patel, their communications officer, piped up. "Maybe it's just an ancient power source. You know, like some sort of alien battery." His nervous chuckle didn't convince anyone, least of all himself. "Or a beacon," muttered Dr. Miriam Cheng, the ship's xenobiologist, who was leaning against the far console. Her voice carried the weight of grim possibility. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Elena said, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring her crew or herself. "We'll proceed with caution. Jackson, prep the shuttle. Dr. Cheng, you're with me. Patel, you'll monitor our comms from up here. We'll take 2 security officers. No more, no less. No unnecessary risks." Jackson gave her a skeptical look but didn't argue. "Understood, Captain." Half an hour later, the team descended through the planet's atmosphere in the shuttle, the interior quiet except for the occasional beep of navigation equipment. Through the viewing window, the city below came into focus. It was like no ruin Elena had ever seen. Massive, spindly towers reached skyward, interconnected by bridges that defied gravity with their fragile appearance. Streets wider than any human cities were paved with an iridescent material that shimmered unnaturally in the dim light of D4517's dying sun. The epicenter of it all was the structure Jackson had mentioned. It was an enormous, cubic monolith, jet black and covered in pulsating lines of light that seemed to breathe. "It's beautiful," one of the security officers, Lieutenant Grant, muttered, breaking the silence. "It's something," Dr. Cheng replied, her tone guarded. The shuttle landed in an open plaza near the monolith. As the hatch opened, Elena was the first to step out, the cool air brushing her face. It smelled faintly metallic, with an undertone of something sweet and rotten. The rest of the team followed, weapons ready but not raised. The plaza was unnervingly pristine, as if it had been waiting for visitors all this time. Dr. Cheng crouched down and ran a gloved hand over the shimmering pavement. "No dust. No debris. This place should be in ruins after so long. Elena glanced at Jackson. Any signs of life? He checked his handheld scanner. Nothing. Not a single life form on the entire planet. Except for us. The team moved cautiously toward the monolith, the sense of foreboding growing with every step. When they reached its base, they found a massive doorway, perfectly smooth and devoid of any visible mechanisms. How do we get in? Grant asked, his voice echoing slightly. Before anyone could answer, the lines of light on the monolith shifted, forming intricate patterns that raced across its surface. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through their bones. Then, without warning, the doorway melted away, revealing a dark interior. Okay, that's inviting, Patel said through the comms from the ship. Elena glanced back at her team. Stay sharp. If anything feels off, we retreat immediately. They stepped inside, their suit lights cutting through the darkness. The interior was vast, far larger than the monolith had appeared from the outside. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and atop it was a sphere, smooth, black, and pulsating faintly with the same light as the walls. Dr. Cheng approached cautiously, her scanner whirring. This thing, it's emitting low-level radiation, but it's structured. Almost like a signal. A signal to what? Elena asked. Before Cheng could answer, the sphere's light intensified, and a voice echoed through the chamber. It wasn't in any known language, but the meaning was clear in their minds. You should not have come. The crew froze, their instincts screaming to retreat. But before they could move, the sphere's light expanded, engulfing them in a blinding flash. When the light faded, they found themselves in a different chamber, the air heavier and the walls pulsating more rapidly. Captain, Jackson said, his voice tight. This wasn't in the mission plan. Elena drew her sidearm, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her chest. Stay together. No one panics. Cheng, any idea what just happened? Some kind of teleportation, she replied, though she sounded far from confident. But I don't think we're alone anymore. As if on cue, a low, guttural sound reverberated through the chamber, followed by the faint sound of movement in the shadows. The crew huddled closer together, their lights scanning the darkness. And then they saw it, or rather, them. Shadowy figures, humanoid but unmistakably alien, emerged from the walls, their bodies seemingly formed from the same pulsating light as the monolith. Weapons up, Elena ordered, her heart pounding. But the figures didn't attack. Instead, they stopped several meters away, their glowing eyes fixed on the humans. One stepped forward, its form solidifying slightly as it spoke. The Guardians awaken, it said, its voice a mix of mechanical and organic tones. You have triggered what should remain sealed. What is this place? Elena demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The figure tilted its head, as if considering her question. It is a prison. And you are too late to leave. The chamber seemed to pulse in rhythm with their collective fear, the wall's eerie glow intensifying with each passing second. Captain Elena Marlowe gripped her sidearm tightly, her knuckles white under the strain. The alien figure, or guardian, as it had called itself, stood motionless, its glowing eyes fixed on her, unblinking and unnervingly steady. Behind her, Jackson Hayes' breath came fast and shallow, the telltale sign of his usual bravado rapidly eroding. Dr. Miriam Cheng clutched her scanner, her fingers dancing over its interface, desperate for any information that could make sense of the situation. The two security officers, Grant and Sullivan, flanked the group, their weapons trained on the silent guardians that loomed in the shadows. What do you mean, a prison? Elena asked, her voice cutting through the oppressive silence. She kept her tone firm, masking the unease that gnawed at the edges of her composure. What's being contained here? The guardian's form flickered, as though it were struggling to maintain coherence. When it spoke, its voice carried a weight that felt almost physical, pressing against their chests. A weapon. A mistake. A lesson that should never be forgotten. Jackson let out a nervous laugh, his scanner trembling slightly in his hands. Great. Cryptic warnings. That's not ominous at all. Quiet, Elena snapped, her eyes never leaving the Guardian. What kind of weapon? Before the figure could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, and the pulsating lights on the walls began to shift, forming intricate patterns that seemed to dance and writhe. Dr. Cheng's scanner emitted a sharp beep, and she stared at the screen, her expression darkening. "Captain," she said, her voice trembling. "The energy readings are spiking. Whatever this place is, it's waking up." The Guardian's glowing eyes dimmed momentarily before flaring brighter than before. "The seal weakens. You must leave. Now. Leave." Jackson barked, his voice climbing an octave. "You just said it's too late to leave. Make up your mind." Ignoring him, Elena took a step forward. "If this is a prison, then what happens if it breaks? What happens to us?" The Guardian's response was chilling in its simplicity. "You will not survive." The rumbling intensified, and a deep, resonant sound filled the air, a sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The shadows in the chamber grew darker, deeper, and something stirred within them. Sullivan cursed under his breath, his grip on his rifle tightening. "Captain," Grant said, his voice low and tense. "We need to move." Elena nodded, her mind racing. "Fall back to the entrance. We regroup on the shuttle and reassess from there." As the team began to retreat, the Guardian stepped forward, blocking their path. "You cannot leave. Not now. The release has begun." "What does that mean?" Elena demanded, her frustration mounting. The Guardian raised a flickering hand, and the chamber's lights dimmed further. "It means you have awakened what sleeps. And now, you must contain it. Or perish." "Contain it," Jackson repeated, his voice tinged with incredulity. "We're explorers, not, whatever the hell you think we are." Before anyone could respond, the chamber's floor split open with a deafening crack. A blinding light surged upward, forcing the team to shield their eyes. When the light subsided, a massive, otherworldly figure stood in the center of the room. Its form was barely comprehensible, a writhing mass of tendrils and shifting geometries that defied logic. The air around it shimmered, distorting reality like heat waves rising from asphalt. Dr. Cheng stared in horror. That shouldn't exist. It's impossible." The creature emitted a sound, a low, guttural roar that vibrated through their bones. The Guardian's voice rang out, louder and more urgent. "The Warden has awakened. You must act." "Act how?" Elena shouted, her frustration boiling over. "What are we supposed to do against that?" The Guardian's form flickered again, and it extended a hand toward the team. In its palm, a small, glowing device materialized, pulsing with the same rhythmic light as the chamber walls. "Take this. It is the key. The only means of control." Elena hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward and taking the device. It was warm to the touch, and as soon as her fingers closed around it, a surge of energy coursed through her. Images flashed in her mind: alien landscapes, battles fought in the distant past, and the horrific destruction wrought by the creature before her. "Captain." Jackson's voice snapped her back to reality. "What's happening?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice unsteady. "But this thing, it's some kind of control mechanism. I think it's meant to direct the Warden." "Direct it?" Grant said incredulously. "You mean control it?" "That's the theory," Elena replied. "But I'm not sure how." The creature roared again, its tendrils lashing out and striking the walls, sending cracks spiderwebbing across their surface. The team scattered, narrowly avoiding the debris that rained down from above. "We don't have time for theories, Captain," Jackson shouted, ducking behind a pillar. "Do something." Elena clenched her jaw and focused on the device in her hand. She could feel it humming, almost like it was alive. Closing her eyes, she concentrated, willing the energy to flow through her. The device responded, its glow intensifying. The Warden hesitated, its movements slowing as the light from the device grew brighter. Elena opened her eyes, her gaze locking onto the creature. "Stand down," she commanded, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her. For a moment, the creature stilled. The chamber fell silent, save for the faint hum of the device. Then, with a deafening roar, the Warden surged forward, its tendrils lashing out once more. The team scattered, their weapons firing futilely at the creature's incomprehensible form. "It's not working," Jackson shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "It's resisting," the Guardian said, its voice strained. "You must strengthen the bond. Or it will destroy you." "Strengthen it how?" Elena demanded, dodging a tendril that struck the ground where she had stood moments before. The Guardian did not answer. Instead, it extended its flickering hands toward the creature, beams of light emanating from its palms. The Warden recoiled, its form shifting and writhing as the beams struck it. The Guardian's voice rang out, commanding and unwavering. "Focus. Control your fear. The device responds to intent." Elena took a deep breath, centering herself. She closed her eyes again, blocking out the chaos around her. In her mind, she envisioned the creature's tendrils retracting, its form shrinking, its power contained. The device in her hand pulsed in response, its light growing blindingly bright. When she opened her eyes, the Warden had stopped moving. Its form was smaller now, less chaotic, and its tendrils hung limp. The chamber was silent once more, save for the heavy breathing of the team. "Is it over?" Sullivan asked, his voice shaky. The Guardian stepped forward, its form stabilizing. "For now. But the seal is fragile. You must act quickly to restore it." Elena looked at the device in her hand, its glow now faint. "How?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The Guardian's eyes burned brighter. "You must journey deeper into the monolith. There, you will find the core. Only there can the Warden be contained." Elena exchanged a glance with her team. They were battered, shaken, but still standing. She nodded, determination hardening her features. "Then we move. No one gets left behind." As they prepared to descend further into the monolith, the Guardian's voice echoed one last time. "The path will test you. Be strong, humans. Or your kind will share the fate of those before you." The air grew colder as the team descended deeper into the monolith. Each step they took reverberated through the narrow, pulsating corridors, the walls alive with shifting patterns of light that seemed to mock their every move. Captain Elena Marlowe led the way, the glowing device in her hand acting as their only guide. Behind her, the rest of the team followed in tense silence, their nerves fraying with each passing moment. "It's too quiet," Jackson muttered, breaking the silence. His voice, though hushed, echoed in the confined space, making everyone flinch. "Too deliberate. Focus," Elena replied, her tone sharp. "We don't have room for distractions." Dr. Miriam Cheng lagged slightly behind, her eyes darting between her scanner and the glowing walls. "These readings, they're shifting," she whispered. "It's almost like the structure is reacting to us. Learning." "Great," Sullivan grumbled, his rifle at the ready. "We're walking through a giant alien brain." The tension thickened as they entered a wider chamber. The walls were lined with towering columns, each one covered in the same glowing, shifting patterns. At the center of the room stood a massive structure that resembled an altar, its surface carved with symbols that seemed to writhe and twist as they stared at it. "This must be the core," Elena said, her voice steady despite the unease gnawing at her. The device in her hand pulsed more intensely, as if responding to the altar's presence. "Looks like we're not alone," Grant said, his voice low. He gestured toward the shadows at the edges of the room. Shapes moved there, indistinct but unmistakably present. "Weapons ready," Elena ordered. "But hold fire unless absolutely necessary. We don't know what we're dealing with yet." The team spread out, their lights cutting through the gloom. The shadows didn't retreat but didn't advance either, hovering just beyond the edge of clarity. Dr. Cheng approached the altar cautiously, her scanner whirring. "Captain," she said, her voice tinged with awe and fear. "This altar, it's some kind of control interface. But it's organic. Alive." Elena joined her, the device in her hand resonating with the altar. She hesitated for only a moment before placing the device on the altar's surface. The reaction was immediate. The entire chamber lit up, the walls and columns pulsing with an intense light. The shadows at the edges of the room recoiled, hissing in a language none of them could understand. "What did you do?" Jackson demanded, his voice rising in panic. "I'm Not sure, Elena admitted. She stared at the altar as the device began to sink into its surface, merging with it. The symbols on the altar glowed brighter, and a deep, resonant hum filled the air. The shadows surged forward, no longer content to linger in the periphery. They took shape as they approached, humanoid but distorted, their forms shifting and twisting as if they couldn't decide what to be. "Open fire," Elena commanded. The team unleashed a barrage of firepower, their weapons lighting up the chamber. The creatures recoiled under the assault, their forms flickering and dissolving with each hit. But for every one that fell, 2 more emerged from the darkness. "They just keep coming," Sullivan shouted, reloading his rifle with frantic speed. Elena's mind raced. The device, it had to be the key. Somehow, it was connected to the Warden, the prison, everything. "Cheng, can you activate it?" she yelled over the chaos. Dr. Cheng was already working, her hands flying over the scanner. "I'm trying. But the interface, it's rewriting itself as I go. It's like it's testing me." "Then work faster," Jackson shouted, firing another burst at the advancing creatures. The Warden's roar echoed from somewhere deeper within the monolith, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The walls pulsed violently, the patterns shifting into chaotic, incomprehensible shapes. "It's waking up fully," Dr. Cheng said, her voice tight with fear. "If we don't contain it now, we won't get another chance." Elena's gaze locked onto the altar. The device was fully integrated now, its glow pulsating in time with the monolith's erratic rhythms. She could feel it calling to her, a presence in her mind urging her to act. "Cover me," she ordered. "I'm going in." "What?" Jackson stared at her in disbelief. "You don't even know what it does." "We don't have time to figure it out," Elena snapped. "If I don't try, we're all dead. Now cover me." Reluctantly, Jackson nodded, turning his focus back to the advancing creatures. Elena stepped up to the altar, placing her hands on its surface. The moment she did, a surge of energy coursed through her, and the chamber dissolved around her. She was no longer in the monolith. Instead, she stood in a vast, endless void, the darkness around her pierced by countless points of light. The Warden's presence loomed, massive and incomprehensible, a swirling mass of chaotic energy that threatened to consume everything. "You must choose," a voice said, echoing in her mind. It was neither human nor alien, but something beyond comprehension. "Contain or destroy." Elena's heart pounded. "How?" she demanded. "How do I choose?" The lights around her shifted, forming patterns that seemed to tell a story, the rise and fall of civilizations, each one destroyed by the Warden's power. She saw their mistakes, their hubris, their desperation. And she saw the cost of their failure. "Contain it," the voice said. "But know this, to contain is to sacrifice." "What sacrifice?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. The void offered no answer, only silence. The Warden roared, its chaotic form surging toward her. Instinctively, Elena raised her hands, the device's energy flowing through her. She focused on the Warden, willing it to shrink, to subdue itself. The energy resisted, fighting against her will, but she pushed harder, drawing on every ounce of strength she had. Back in the chamber, the team watched in stunned silence as the altar's light grew blindingly bright. The creatures recoiled, their forms dissolving into nothingness. The Warden's roar faded, replaced by a deafening silence. Elena collapsed to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The chamber was still, the pulsating light now a steady, calming rhythm. "Captain." Jackson approached cautiously, his weapon lowered. "Are you okay?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "It's contained," she said. "For now." Dr. Cheng helped her to her feet, her expression a mix of relief and concern. "What happened? What did you see?" Elena shook her head. "Later. We need to secure the seal and get out of here before anything else goes wrong." As the team began their ascent back to the surface, the Guardian's voice echoed one final time. "You have done what others could not. But beware, human. The Warden's prison is never eternal. Your kind must remain vigilant. Always." The team emerged from the depths of the monolith into the faint light of D4517's dying sun. The air outside felt heavier now, not from the atmosphere but from the weight of what they had endured and the knowledge they carried. Captain Elena Marlowe led them across the iridescent plaza, her steps slow but deliberate, the glowing device still clutched tightly in her hand. Around them, the city's alien architecture seemed to hum softly, as if the monolith itself was settling into a fragile peace. The shuttle loomed ahead, its metallic surface a stark reminder of their humanity amidst the alien surroundings. Jackson Hayes glanced back at the towering structure they had left behind, its once pulsating lights now dimmed to a faint glow. "Do you think it'll hold?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. Elena didn't answer immediately. She stopped at the base of the shuttle's ramp and turned to face the team. Her gaze lingered on each of them: Jackson, still gripping his scanner like a lifeline; Dr. Cheng, her face pale but resolute; Grant and Sullivan, their weapons lowered but their stances tense. They had all survived, but not unscathed. The events within the monolith had changed them, just as they had changed her. "It will hold," Elena said finally, her voice firm. "But not forever. The Warden, it's contained, but the seal isn't invincible. Someday, someone will have to face this again. Maybe us. Maybe another civilization. But for now, it's quiet." Dr. Cheng stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "Captain, what did you see in there? When you connected with the device?" Elena hesitated, the memory of the void and the Warden's chaotic presence still vivid in her mind. "I saw what it's capable of," she said. "The destruction it caused, the civilizations it wiped out. And I saw why those civilizations failed. They tried to control it, to use it. That's why the prison was built in the first place. It wasn't just to contain the Warden. It was a warning. A warning we almost ignored," Jackson muttered, shaking his head. Elena nodded. "We did. And we can't make the same mistake. Not again." Grant stepped closer, his expression grim. "What about the Guardian? Did it survive?" "It's still there," Elena said. "But its energy is fading. It's been holding this prison together for longer than we can comprehend. It's up to us now." The weight of her words settled over the team, but Elena refused to let despair take root. She climbed the shuttle's ramp, gesturing for the others to follow. "We've done what we can here. Let's get back to the ship and report to command. They need to know what we've found and what's at stake." Inside the shuttle, the familiar hum of the engines brought a small measure of comfort. As they ascended into the atmosphere, D4517's surface grew smaller below them, the monolith standing as a silent sentinel in the vast expanse of alien terrain. The team sat in reflective silence, the adrenaline of their ordeal giving way to exhaustion and contemplation. Back aboard the Aegis, Elena convened a meeting in the briefing room. The holographic display projected a map of D4517, with the monolith highlighted at its center. The glow of the projection bathed the room in pale blue light as the team reviewed the data they had collected. "We need to classify this planet as a no-go zone," Elena said. "No expeditions, no research teams, nothing. Whatever curiosity brought us here, it's not worth the risk." Dr. Cheng nodded in agreement. "The technology we saw, it's far beyond anything we've encountered before. If we tried to replicate or study it, we'd only be inviting disaster." Jackson sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "And what happens when someone ignores the warnings? You know how humans are. We're not exactly great at leaving things alone." Elena leaned forward, her hands resting on the table. "Then we make the warnings impossible to ignore. We document everything. The Warden, the Guardian, the monolith. We make it clear that this is not just another alien artifact to poke and prod. It's a line we're not meant to cross." Sullivan crossed his arms, his expression skeptical. "And what if someone crosses it anyway? What if they don't believe us?" "Then it's on us to make sure they understand the cost," Elena replied. "That's why we survived. To carry this message forward." The room fell silent as her words sank in. They all understood the gravity of their mission now, the responsibility that came with being the first to confront the Warden and live to tell the tale. It wasn't just about survival. It was about ensuring that survival had meaning. Later, as the crew settled into their routines, Elena stood alone on the observation deck, staring out at the stars. The device, now inert, rested on the console beside her. She traced its smooth surface with her fingers, its warmth a faint echo of the power it once held. "We guard something worse," she murmured, recalling the ancient warning left by the civilizations that came before. It was a chilling thought, but also a sobering one. Humanity had always prided itself on its resilience, its ingenuity. But perhaps the greatest strength lay not in conquering the unknown, but in knowing when to step back. As the stars stretched endlessly before her, Elena allowed herself a small, weary smile. They had faced the darkness and lived. They had learned. And for now, that was enough.